Did anyone ever actually think that Alex Albon would make this sort of rejuvenation that he has done in the past couple of years? I mean, let's look back in the days of when he was axed by Red Bull, made their reserve driver, and essentially missed a year of F1 entirely. I don't think anyone expected him to be in the position where after 2 years at Williams, he's leading the recharge of them, going up the grid, and making Williams a competitive outfit again. And with that being said, he's actually starting to get attention from some of the big names in F1. But with all that being said, the question does still remain, what is next for Alex Albon in F1? So, to start at the beginning, let's roll it back to 2019 when Albon first came into F1 with now the old name of Toro Rosso, and even older name now because AlphaTauri apparently changing their name to Racing Bulls. So let's roll it back to 2019. Alex had just joined Toro Rosso in his debut year as a rookie in Formula 1, and he was putting together some impressive performances and getting people to notice what he was doing in a car that really was bang in the middle of the pack at the time. So much so that when Pierre Gasly started having problems in the Red Bull and was really struggling to match or get anywhere near, for that matter, Max Verstappen that year, that basically they dropped Gasly down into the Toro Rosso seat and brought Albon up. Some may say that was a little bit premature, but again, his results were impressive and there weren't really any other viable options at the time, so Albon got the nod and moved up into the Red Bull team. And what would follow wouldn't exactly be a fairy tale beginning for Albon. He did have an impressive end to 2019 and getting a bunch of points before the end of the season. Brazil, it's arguable that he should have won that race because he was second in catching Lewis Hamilton, and if not for some contact on one of the turns, he probably would have won that race. But let's be honest here, if you look at overall that time period of Albon being at Red Bull, he was battered by both Red Bull and Verstappen. We all know that he was truly thrown into the lion's den, having to deal with not only being the number 2 driver to Max, being a rookie, and then still fairly inexperienced going into his second year, but then also having to deal with the ongoing politics that there is to deal with in the Red Bull garage. We all know that Christian Horner makes some comments at times, but again, he's probably not the worst culprit for this. I mean, Helmut Marko is something of a destroyer of drivers' confidence, really, when you look at some of the drivers that have gone through. You've had Kvyat, you've had Gasly, and you had Albon. And at the minute, you've currently got Sergio Perez having to sort of deal with Marco's input, shall we call it. So yeah, heading into 2020, it became slightly more optimistic for Albon in terms of that he had some decent performances in the Red Bull, and it was a case of could he do it again and could he get fairly close to Max? Unfortunately, the answer was a resounding no. Driving with Max Verstappen must be one of the toughest challenge, if not the toughest challenge, in motorsport, and it proved to be the case even back in 2020. And despite scoring a couple of podiums in 2020, let's remind ourselves Red Bull weren't necessarily the all-conquering car that they are nowadays. He was still way off the pace of Max, and, you know, comments from Max himself at times saying, he's 30 seconds behind me, how can we really compete when the second driver is 30 seconds behind me? And to be fair, the rest of Red Bull's hierarchy was saying the same thing, like Albon wasn't being quick enough and wasn't getting the pace out of the car that they expected. And to be fair, it's not like anyone else has struggled in the Red Bull since. And so, at the end of 2020, Albon got demoted to reserve driver. And to be fair, for me, it was even worse than Gasly's demotion, because Gasly at least had a Toro Rosso seat to make him feel better about still being on the F1 grid. Albon got chucked out of the competition entirely. And to be honest, for lesser drivers, it would have been the end of most people's F1's career. But Albon stuck to his guns, worked hard as a reserve driver, kept Red Bull in good graces, and got some help to get back on the grid. And Williams came knocking. After the ascendancy of George Russell going to Mercedes, there was an empty seat. And to be fair to George, he helped his mate out by giving a big, I don't know, reference, advocation, whatever you want to call it, to Williams to say, this is the guy you want as your driver next. And you've got to take into consideration, Williams were at the bottom of the F1 ladder at this point, struggling to pick up points or get anywhere near the top 10 on a consistent basis. Sure, George was putting in really good qualifying laps, but race pace just really wasn't there. And with George leaving, Williams needed a new leader, and in came Alex to save the day. And at this point, Albon had signed the contract. No one knew what to expect. He'd been out for a year. We hadn't really seen him on the track. It was kind of hard to judge where he was at mentally, whether he was able to give this his all or if he was still recovering from the battering he'd got at Red Bull. And the answer, as they say, is in the pudding. The proof is in the pudding. He has absolutely smashed it since being at Williams. Roll it back to the 2022 season, and he scored his first point for Williams in the Australian Grand Prix with a mightily impressive drive where he only pitted on the penultimate lap and drove on one set of tyres until that pit stop, and then was able to clinch 10th and get Williams their first point of the season. And throughout the majority of that 2022 season, he did drive the wheels off that car. The 4 points he picked up over the total of that year, I don't really think tells the full story of Albon's season. He drove magnificently and really, probably, if Williams had a little bit more pace and consistency, probably should have had a lot more points. And then, in the season that's just finished in 2023, he took it a step further. He led Williams to the 7th place in the Constructors' Championship, scoring all but one of their points in this season. And to be fair, at Williams, it's looking super bright right now. They've got Albon leading the way and helping them develop the car. They've got James Vowles taking over, who seems to be doing a magnificent job in his new role after leaving Mercedes. So it's any wonder that Williams are asking the question of, well, can we keep hold of Albon? And it is a big question going around the F1 paddock at the moment. Most people will know, but if you don't, Albon's contract is up at the end of 2024. And really, it's a question of, can Williams keep hold of him? Because recent rumours have suggested there are a lot of eyes on Albon at the moment. And to be fair, there's a lot of shuffling of the pack. There's a lot of dominoes that can fall. But a lot of the grid are talking about trying to get Albon in after doing the stellar job that he's been doing at Williams. But we need to take a look at a few of the options, really, to assess like how likely is it that he's going to move up the grid or get one of those big time seats. The first place I want to look at is where he originally started at, and that's Red Bull. Red Bull obviously have this ongoing saga with Sergio Perez. Obviously, the favourite for that seat, as we all know, is Daniel Ricciardo. If Daniel Ricciardo doesn't have a great year in Racing Bulls or AlphaTauri or whatever they call themselves next year, is it possible that Alex might get the nod? Possibly. But for me, if I'm Alex, why would you go back? You know it can turn into a toxic environment if it doesn't go quite right. Sure, you've had a couple more seasons under your belt in F1 and, you know, you've got that experience. But is that an environment you really want to try and resurrect and go back into and know that you're going to be second fiddle to Max at all times? I'm just not sure it's the right move. Red Bull might be more than willing to get him in if Ricciardo doesn't have a great season. But I do think Ricciardo is probably the best option for Red Bull, or certainly the option that they think is best anyway. And then if you take a look at Ferrari, whilst I would probably, if Sainz were to leave, I would probably go for Albon as probably one of the best options out there right now, because you got George and Lewis signed till the end of 2025. You've got Norris till the end of 2025. Piastri is way in the future for his contract, and yeah, you've got the two Alpine drivers, but really, are they really going to be able to help Ferrari develop? I think that's what a lot of people have been impressed by with Alex, is fact that he's able to drive the car, help the engineering team develop the cars as much as he has, and help them propel the car up the grid. And to be fair, I can understand why Ferrari would be interested, but the problem is that the rumours at the moment are that the two drivers are signing contracts to at least extend for 2 years, if not more. And then you get to McLaren. Now, McLaren, I think, is probably, out of everybody, in the most recent options that are coming up, are probably the most likely. The reason I say that is because I do think if we get to the end of 2025 and Lando either A, hasn't won a race, or B, the car has fallen off, I think Lando leaves McLaren and probably either goes to Mercedes or Red Bull. That then frees up a spot for McLaren, and if there is anything in terms of a fit that I think would work really well, it's that environment of McLaren of being very supportive to the drivers. Let's ignore the whole Ricciardo fiasco, but being very supportive to the drivers and helping the drivers along and listening to the drivers in terms of what they need and what Albon can do on the grid. Again, it might be tight with Piastri in terms of the competition, but I think Albon can handle that and will, in a quicker car, show the pace that he can truly deliver. The other option that I think is very viable for Albon at the end of 2024, potentially going into 2025, depending on what happens with contracts, is Alpine. Yes, at the minute, Alpine are something of a weird team to be part of at the minute, because yes, they've got this new investors of 25% into the team, and there's a load of money coming into the team to help them develop further. But the engine just isn't up to scratch on Alpine, and it hasn't been for a while. And is that something that Albon can overcome? I'm not entirely sure. Gasly and Ocon have struggled at times during this year. They've had good races, they've had podiums here or there. But really, is that what you want to do and put yourself into at this moment in time? Obviously, 2024 could show a total difference to a lot of these teams, and it might change the options for Albon in the future. But for me, if I'm Albon, I would probably stick it at Williams, because the way they're developing and the way that James Vowles has got that team operating at the minute, it's showing that they are able to develop further. Now, by the end of 2024, they may hit the ceiling. They may get, they may finish 7th again or 6th or whatever. And it may be to a point where maybe Alex needs to move on and may need to get another seat to go further up the grid. But at this moment in time, in terms of the seats he's looking for, I just don't see where the options are in terms of the immediate future of at the end of 2024. For me, I think the end of 2025 is the more likely option. Now, the reason I say that is I mentioned it before with McLaren, but I also think that there's a big gap there for Mercedes if Albon can show he's got a good drive in him. If we get to the end of 2025, Hamilton's won another championship. Just as a theoretical, Hamilton's won his 8th championship. He's into his early 40s by this point. Is Hamilton going to continue on that much longer? I don't really think so. I think Hamilton goes probably by 2025, 2026, I would say, because you've got 2026. That's when the new cars come in. Is he going to want to stick around and see if Mercedes can work out a new car in 2026 if he hasn't got another championship? I don't really think so. And then you've got the fact that if George Russell is there for the long term, and George is a huge advocate for what Albon can do in a car, and I think if Mercedes see what he can do in the Williams, and then Hamilton goes, and they want someone who isn't going to rock the boat too much and is going to be helpful for the team, Albon for me is a perfect candidate right now. Now, 2024 may go amiss. I'm not saying that this is a certified thing, but again, if Albon has another solid year in 2024 and the deck shuffles, the best thing for Albon might be just to extend the contract another year, see what comes up in terms of options at the end of 2025, and take it from there. But with that being said, I think there are a lot of options out there for Alex Albon to take on into the future. There's a lot of whispering and eyes on him at the moment, and he is exceeding those expectations. And if he can do that in 2024 again, then really, I don't think there's a limit to what team he can go to. I think at the end of 2022, I was a bit more hesitant in that, and I think I was thinking, maybe Aston Martin, maybe an Alpine, maybe limiting it. But with how he's progressed in 2023, he's 27 years old, he's got a few seasons now under his belt, he knows how to drive a car in F1 pretty well. Why wouldn't you want to take him up as an option? I think outside of Albon, really the only other options that people are looking at, the number one option on the grid that everyone wants is Lando Norris. Clearly, that's the number one option. But outside of that, in terms of viable options, I would rather have Albon in the seat at this moment in time than, say, maybe Ocon and Gasly. I know that might be a controversial thing to say, but I think Albon's a safe pair of hands, and he gets the most out of the car that you asked him to, especially if you're in that mid-pack. And that's what a lot of teams will be looking for when they're going into 2025, into 2026 with these new regulations. So, let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Alex Albon can get one of these big seats in the F1 grid in the future? Or do you think he should stick it out at Williams? Let me know in the comments. As always, guys, thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I hope you have a great Christmas and a great New Year. We'll be back next Friday for the next video. And yeah, we'll see you soon. I hope you have a lot of mince pies, a lot of turkey, or if you're vegetarian, a vegetarian choice. I hope you have a great Christmas either way, and I'll see you soon and have a great time.